Okay, so we're now familiar with modeling and the different ways to create and manipulate geometry. Now it's time to figure out how we can actually make things move. So fundamentally, if we grab a cube, all of these little icons, these little square-shaped diamonds, all of these are parameters that we can keyframe. So for example, if we were to move this cube, let's hit that, and then we can go animation. We'll right click on this, hit animation, and show the F curve. And this F curve is really interesting. So I'm navigating this with the right click and then zooming in and out. So let's go to frame 24. You drag this here. Let's click again, and you'll see that we have a curve representation. And let's actually fade that out. So what we can do is grab this first keyframe, pull the handle, and what I'm doing is I'm pulling it, but I'm holding Shift and Control, which locks it to this plane. So if we were to just try drag it, we wouldn't be able to get an exact bottom level to that curve. Whereas if I hold Shift and Control, you'll see now that it will ramp, and then it will go really slowly at the start, and then zoom up, and then fade in. We can also do the same thing here with this outer keyframe. I'm going to do the same thing, drag there, and so we can see that's pretty cool, that's pretty snappy. So fundamentally, that's how you animate in Cinema 4D. You've got F curves for everything. You've got these little parameters that you can keyframe. And obviously you can go more crazy. So if I wanted to like animate the rotation of the cube as well, and we hit Shift to select all these three attributes, and we go right click, animation, show F curve. You'll see that we have the curves there, and then if we go frame 24 and we adjust this to be random, so let's, something like that, and we just keyframe both, you'll see that all three curves now are in our graph editor. You can also select a particular keyframe attribute. So for example, we just want the H rotation here. We can go F curve and then show all tracks. This is ticked by default, but you can untick that, so then it will only show the rotation, or the the parameter that you want to see. Okay, so if we were to select all three of the rotation ones, we can then do the same thing where we're fading in and out. So see, it's like, whoa, it's pretty crazy. You can show or hide the F curve editor with this icon in the bottom left corner. So we can tick and untick that. And then let's talk about cloners and how to animate cloners as well. Because I showed you in the last lesson how we could set up, a ring of clones, but how do we actually animate them to look pretty cool? So we're going to grab a sphere, going to make that a child of the cloner by pressing Alt, and then I'm going to do a radial, going to up the radius as well, and up the count to be something like 10. All right, and then what we're going to do is grab a plane effector. We want to move them up. But how do we make it so that, say, they're going, there's like this sweep that goes around, and as it goes around, all of the balls move up within a certain slice of that area. So it's kind of like a radar ping, if you've seen anything like that. So what we're going to do is, in this plane effector, going to go to fields, and then what we want here is a radial field. You'll see nothing's changed. It's because it's just going from 0 to 360 degrees. But you'll see as I start to modify this slice, only certain clones are being affected. So think of it as like a pie. So the more pie that you have, the more clones get affected. So let's affect only 2 at a time. Actually, let's go 3 at a time. And then what we could do is animate this radial field. And we could animate this offset to actually rotate that around. So let's do that. Let's go to frame 0, and on frame 0, let's add a keyframe for 0 degrees. Then let's go to frame 40, and let's do 360 degrees. So in between that, that's just going to rotate around. Just like that. Cool. And you'll see that at frame 40, it stops. So what if we want it to just keep going into infinity? What we're going to do is right click, animation, show the F curve. I'm going to zoom out, so Alt right mouse button. You'll see that right now there's a curve, so it's actually being gently kind of slowed down. We don't want that. We want it to be a linear interpolation. I'm going to select these two keyframes, and then instead of this spline, we're going to change the type to be linear. Now you'll see that there's no smoothing curves. It's just from point A to point B, which is what we want. So what we're going to do then is go functions, track after. So this is going to tell Cinema 4D what behavior we want it to do after that last keyframe. So if we go continue after, you'll see that it will continue going on the trajectory that it's figured out between these 2 points. Whereas if we were to go repeat after, you see that it's just repeating our keyframes, which would also work because again, 360 looks the same as 0. But if you want it to keep going, just do the continue after. And we can extend out our timeline. So if we wanted like 200 frames, got more to work with. And let's close. Oh, one thing to note as well is there's a dope sheet. So that's another way of looking at your keyframes. I almost always prefer looking at the curves visually. That's just how my brain works, but yeah, you might prefer the dope sheet, so that's cool as well. But if you, press this, that hides it. Okay, and then you'll see as we keep playing, it will just continue on into infinity, which is pretty cool. Whereas how many frames you want, you could have that going overnight if you want. And then, okay, let's go to the cloner, and under the effectors tab, you'll see all the effectors that are being influenced. So you can see that the plane effect is here. And let's actually rename this to be upwards movement. Okay, it's upwards movement. Go. All right. So you'll notice, like, this is cool if it's like an 8-bit kind of dot vibe. But what if we want it to be like a smooth interpolation between that? So instead of it just jumping between each frame to go, up and down and up and down, what if we actually want to have in between frames? We can do this with something called the delay effector. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to reorder stuff. I'm going to put this in a null and call it effectors. Okay. What I'm going to do is hit the cloner, and then we're going to go to the delay. And also what's worth noting is if we select the cloner, any effector that we apply will automatically be added to this list. So you'll see if we select the cloner and add a plane effector, it will add it automatically. Whereas if we weren't selecting the cloner and we just added a plane effector, it doesn't add. So again, if you want to add it straight away, make sure you select it. And then let's go to delay. Okay. And then I'm going to drag it into the effectors list. I'm going to drag it after, just visually so we remember it comes afterwards. And by default, it's set to blend. So let's just have a look at what it's doing. Look at that. You can see that it's instantly added some secondary smoothing motion to it. So again, if I disable this, you'll see that it's very just, abrupt, the transition between the two states. If I add the delay, it's now smoothing that in. And it's all procedural, which is pretty cool. So we can change the amount of blend. Look at that. We get something more satisfying. We can turn that down so it's like a bit less, or we could change it to spring. So you'll see that now they're like bouncing balls, which is pretty cool. Now this green kind of region, that's because in our plane effector, we've got it set to be fields color under the color mode. So if we actually have a look at that, so we go into our radial field, which is here. You can also access fields by pressing them in the effector. So this and that are the same thing. So the controls, they live in two places. You'll see there. But if we go into the color remap, that's where you can see that the color is set to this lime green. So if we do like a blue, you see that they'll fade from blue to white. We could change it to be like pink. And it's cool because you can then use this data at render time as well to change colors of things. There's so many possibilities with MoGraph, but yeah, just wanted to show you how to animate something like this using the MoGraph tools and effectors. Another way of animating that I use very frequently is the vibrate tag or animation tags. An example of this, let's grab a human figure. So just going to grab a figure here. I'm going to right click and then I'm going to go to animation tags and hit the vibrate tag. There you go. So we've got controls for position, rotation, or scale. And it's definitely important before you enable any of these, on your figure, press the record active object. So this is basically just a button to hit keyframes for all of the transform parameters at once. So what that means is if we were to then like screw this up and push it like way off into space, and then if we were to press play on the viewport, on the timeline, boom, it would just snap back to that original spot. And that's really good because for the vibrate tag, we're going to be enabling some random movement. So if we just do position and we just make the amplitude something crazy, you'll see that it starts moving all over the place. I'm just going to disable the geometry only playback so we can still see the UI. And then if we were to hit pause, you wouldn't want it to then be here. You'd want the object to always come back to its original position. So that's why we added the keyframe at the beginning, so that if we go to the start of the animation and we disable our vibrate tag, it will then just return to its original position, which is good. Let's re-enable it, go to our tag. You can see that it's moving randomly. The amplitude is basically the strength, so how much it's moving. So you can see, whoa, get real crazy. The frequency is how fast that movement is. So if I would change that to 0.2, see he goes really slow. He's very graceful. It's like a dancer. And then if we want rotation as well, you can see that's that orientation. And then, so yeah, you can see that there's definitely pretty crazy things you can do with the vibrate tag, but it's really good when used subtly to add some extra movement that's procedural. You can change the seed as well, so that's then going to change, the noise pattern that it's using. You can do regular pulse. So if I up the frequency, you'll see that it's just regularly using the same sort of pattern. Yeah, have some fun playing around with this. It's a lot of fun. You can just do some random stuff. So that's also a way that you can procedurally move stuff and animate it. And the cool thing about the vibrate tag is it works on cameras too. So we haven't actually dropped down a camera yet, so I'll hover down here, go to the standard camera. I'm going to look through that camera by pressing this button here. So that when that's white, that means I'm looking through that camera. So see the camera there, and if I hit that button, I'm now looking through the camera. This is not an in-depth camera tutorial, that'll come a bit later, but yeah, you'll see I'm just going to drop down a person. I'm going to go into that camera. Okay, I'm going to frame him nicely. I think I'm going to go for like a cinematic 50 mil. It's looking good. All right, I'm going to keyframe to make sure we have our original position locked before we do anything. Then I could right click and go to animation tags vibrate, or I could hit Shift C and then go for a vibrate tag. Boom, same thing. All right, and then we don't really want position. We could do it so it's emulating, a bit of camera move there. That's physically moving the camera in 3D space. So you see it's subtle. But what I usually do for my cameras is just a little bit of rotation, not necessarily on that axis, but just a little bit, something like disable position for the moment, 0.5, 0.3 on the banking, and 0.2. And then I'll lower the frequency down to something like 0.5. And you see it just adds this very slight float, but it really helps with a bit of realism. If we can accentuate it as well. So it's really good for adding just some quick cinematic movement to your cameras using the vibrate tag. So it can animate objects, it can animate cameras. Really, really handy. And then in terms of the animation tags, there's one called the track modifier, and this is really, really cool. So again, basic practice. Let's grab this cube. Let's keyframe it on the x-axis. Let's go to frame 72. Let's drag it out. hit another keyframe, gonna right click, look at the F curve. I'm then gonna smooth out the handles so it's nice and ramped. Okay, so now, cool. So we've got this animation. Now what we can do is right click, animation tags, track modifier. By default, it's not doing anything. But if we, so the mode's right now set to spring. If we up the strength of that, you'll see there's actually a bit of overshoot. This will be more obvious if we make the ending more abrupt. So I'm going to right click, go to animation, and then I'm actually going to set this to be a 0 tangent, which will mean it's got no spline tangent that we can drag. So this is also really helpful because it allows us to have a gradual start, but then we haven't smoothed out the end, which is actually really good. Say if we were cutting a shot here and you want to make it feel like the movement continues on after the shot ends. So you can see here, so let me just play it. And you can see that there's a bit of a springy motion there, which is pretty cool. You can up the stiffness as well. That's pretty cool. It's like it's hit a block. But yeah, you can see how easy it is to just add that additional animation using the track modifier tag. This is another one that I use all the time, and it just helps with speeding up animation. Because if you were to try and animate that bounce manually, you know, you'd have to, say, delete that and then, you know, like keyframe that and then boom, and then like, you know, you'd have to manually tweak it, and then you'd have to tweak all the keyframes. Whereas, just undo that. With this track modifier tag, it's all procedural and you can all change it on the go. So if you're not really liking how it's landing, you can tweak these parameters, change the strength of it. You've also got smooth, so you can smooth it out. Whereas if we were to disable this tag, see that it just stops very abruptly. Whereas if we enable it, kind of slides into position a bit nicer. There's also noise, and if we adjust the strength of this, it gives it additional movement on top of the curve. So the way to think about this is, if I up it to something ridiculous and up the speed, whatever parameter that we have keyframed on an object, for this one, it's only the x-axis. What it's essentially doing is this curve, it's applying a noise modifier to it. There's something similar in Blender, but if you think of it as this curve is then being, there's a noise filter applied to it. That's essentially what this is doing, and you can adjust the speed and the strength of that noise. And you'll notice that it's only affecting it on the axis that we have keyframed. So if I were to go to frame 0 and then I was to click the Y, you'll now see that the noise modifier, it's now affecting the cube on both the X and the Y. But what if we wanted to keep the X trajectory the same, so we didn't want that to be affected, but we wanted it to be random on only the Y? So how do we do that? Because we've keyframed both. In the track modifier, you've got this tab called the inclusion. And then what we're going to do is set it to include. I'll open the timeline, and then I'm going to drag in just the position Y track. So see, it's just the position Y. And boom, just like that, you can see that we still have the original X animation, but it's only modifying the Y. So let's delete that. So that's the track modifier tag. And then if I go to the F curve of the X parameter, we can also press H to snap to a full screen view of whatever we've selected. So for example, if I was to keyframe something on the Y, so just raise that up, keyframe it, and then let's say like I got really lost in the timeline and I was in frame 10,000, I didn't know what to do. If I hit H, it's gonna frame whatever track that I've selected in the full screen of this F curve window. So that's a really cool tip that I hope will help you guys out, which is if you get stuck or if you get lost, just select whatever track it is, hit H, and it will bring you directly back. So that is the vibrate tag and the track modifier tag.